Find another seat. I'm staying right here. That's my seat. My name is on the ticket.
Hold the cabin. Nobody leaves yet.
The first thing Marcus Ellison noticed was not the man's watch, the tailored jacket, or the way the other passengers moved aside when he walked down the aisle. It was the way he looked at the seat. Marcus had spent 11 years restoring historic homes across the Northeast. He knew the difference between something that belonged to someone and something that someone simply wanted. Seat 3A was not just a wider leather chair near the front of the cabin. It was the one place on the flight where his 6-year-old daughter could sit beside him after months of doctor visits, school appointments, and long workdays that kept him away from home. The boarding pass in his hand was clear. Row 3. Seat A, VIP cabin. Confirmed. He had paid for it himself. Marcus adjusted the strap of his daughter's backpack as she climbed into the window seat. She pressed her forehead against the glass and watched the ground crew move beneath the aircraft. "Are we really flying over the clouds?" she asked. "Only if the clouds are polite enough to let us through," Marcus said. She laughed softly. It was the kind of moment he had imagined when he booked the trip. Then the man arrived. He was in his early 50s, wearing a navy suit that looked untouched by airport security lines. The 2 passengers greeted him by name. A flight attendant smiled immediately. "Mr. Whitmore, welcome back," she said. Graham Whitmore looked at the seat, then at Marcus. "Excuse me," he said. Marcus turned. "Yes, I believe there's been a mistake." The words were calm, almost friendly. Marcus looked at his boarding pass again. "I don't think so. This is 3A." Graham gave a small smile, the kind people used when they believed the conversation had already ended. "I'm sure you have the right ticket, but this is a private upgrade arrangement. My assistant usually handles these things." Marcus glanced toward the flight attendant. "You can show my boarding pass." The attendant checked the screen in her hand. A few seconds passed. Then she looked up. "Mr. Ellison, your ticket does show seat 3A. Marcus nodded. "Okay." But Graham did not move. Instead, he leaned slightly toward the attendant. "I understand what the system says. I'm asking whether there's another option." Marcus felt his daughter's hand touch his sleeve, not because she understood the situation, because she understood the feeling. The attendant lowered her voice. "Mr. Whitmore, we need to follow the assigned seating." Graham looked around the cabin. The other passengers had started noticing. "I'm not trying to make a scene," he said. "I'm simply saying there are certain expectations in this cabin." Marcus heard the sentence clearly, not because it was loud, because he had heard versions of it before. Different places, different words, same meaning. He stayed seated. "My daughter and I are happy to stay where we're assigned." Graham's expression changed slightly, not anger. Something closer to disbelief. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Marcus looked at him. "No, I'm sitting in the seat I paid for." The flight attendant stepped between them. "Gentlemen, I need everyone to remain calm." Marcus almost laughed at that word. Calm. The word often appeared after someone else created the problem. A man 2 rows behind them, a middle-aged passenger named Daniel Ruiz, looked up from his tablet. He had been watching the exchange quietly. "I saw the boarding passes," Daniel said. "The father's right." Graham turned. "Sir, I don't think you understand the situation." Daniel looked back down at his tablet. "I understand exactly what I saw." The cabin grew quieter. The flight attendant walked toward the galley, speaking into the phone attached to the wall. Marcus noticed something small. Indicator light on the cabin service panel. It was blinking, not because of the seat dispute, because of a separate issue the crew had just discovered. And within minutes, the problem surrounding seat 3A would become much larger than anyone expected. Because Graham Whitmore had not only challenged the wrong passenger, he had challenged a situation that was already being documented. Part 2. The wrong story GAN's authority. The flight attendant returned less than 2 minutes later with another crew member behind her. Marcus recognized the change immediately. The first attendant had been trying to solve a seating issue. The second one had arrived to manage a situation. There was a difference. "Mr. Ellison," the second attendant said, "I'm Jordan, the senior cabin supervisor. I understand there has been some confusion regarding the seating arrangement." Marcus looked at his daughter, then back at Jordan. "Isn't confusion. My boarding pass says 3A. Jordan nodded politely. "I understand. We're just trying to make sure everyone is comfortable before departure." Graham stood beside the aisle with his arms folded. I appreciate you coming, he said. I don't want this escalated. I simply explained that there was an expectation for this seat. Jordan glanced at him. An expectation based on what, sir? Graham paused. My travel arrangements. Marcus noticed the answer. Not a ticket. Reservation. An expectation. Jordan looked at the screen on her device. Mr. Whitmore, your assigned seat is 5C. Graham smiled. Yes. And normally that would be fine. But given my status with the airline, I assumed there would be flexibility. The word status stayed in the air. Marcus had heard it used in hotels, offices, and restaurants. Sometimes it meant loyalty. Sometimes it meant people believed rules were written for everyone except them. Jordan kept her voice professional. Elite membership provides certain benefits, but it does not replace assigned seating unless an upgrade has been confirmed. A few passengers looked up. Graham's expression tightened. I'm aware of how the program works. Then you understand the seat belongs to the passenger listed on the ticket. Marcus expected the conversation to end there. Instead, Graham shifted direction. I'm concerned about the disruption this is causing. Marcus looked at him. The disruption. That word landed differently. The man who had approached another passenger's seat was now describing the passenger defending his seat as the problem. Jordan seemed to notice it too. Mr. Whitmore, no one is causing a disruption. We are resolving a seating question. Graham lowered his voice. I'm only asking whether the passenger can cooperate. Marcus felt his daughter lean closer. He kept his hands on the armrests. Hey, I already cooperated by showing my ticket. The supervisor looked between them. Mr. Ellison, may I ask if there is any reason you cannot move to another seat if one becomes available? It was a reasonable question. That was what made it difficult. Marcus understood that flight crews had to manage hundreds of people. He understood that sometimes flexibility helped everyone. But he also understood something else. If the person with the confirmed seat was always the easiest person to move, the system quietly taught people who mattered more. My daughter and I chose this seat because it was assigned to us, Marcus said. If the airline needs to offer another option, I'll listen. But I don't think we should start by assuming our reservation is the thing that should change. Jordan studied him for a moment. Then she nodded. That's fair. Graham stepped back. Are you seriously going to let this continue? The question was no longer directed at Marcus. It was directed at authority. Jordan looked at him. I'm going to follow the reservation system. For the first time, Graham seemed uncertain. Not because he had lost the argument. Because the argument had moved somewhere he could not control. Then the aircraft speaker clicked. Captain's voice came through. Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently holding for a brief operational review. We appreciate your patience. Passengers began looking around. Jordan checked her device again. A maintenance alert. Not dangerous, but something the airline required to document before departure. Marcus noticed Jordan glance toward the cabin camera indicator near the galley. A small green light. Recording. The entire exchange at row 3 had been captured. Graham noticed her looking at it. His tone changed. Is this being recorded? Jordan answered honestly. The cabin security system is active. He looked toward Marcus, then toward the passengers who had witnessed the conversation. The problem was no longer private. Daniel Ruiz closed his tablet and stood slightly. Just for the record, he said, I saw what happened from the beginning. Jordan turned. Thank you, sir. We may need a statement if there is a review. Graham exhaled sharply. Review? Over a seat. Jordan did not answer immediately, because she knew what Marcus knew. It was never just about the seat. The seat was simply where the decision became visible. And now the airline had to decide whether it was going to document what happened accurately or make the easier choice and protect the person who complained the loudest. 10 minutes after Marcus first sat down, the flight crew had a different question to answer. Not who deserved 3A, who had been treated as if the answer was already decided. Part 3, the reversible line. The first thing Marcus did after the captain's announcement was check the time. Not because he was impatient, because he had learned that time changed the meaning of almost everything. A 5-minute misunderstanding could become a delayed flight. A delayed flight could become a complaint. A complaint could become a record. And once something entered a record, people who had never been in the room could decide what had happened. His daughter, Ava, was still looking out the window. Daddy? Yeah, are we still going? Marcus looked at her reflection in the glass. I think so. It was not the confident answer he wanted to give, she noticed. His children always noticed the parts adults tried to hide. You said clouds had manners, she whispered. Marcus smiled. I did. Are they being rude? For the first time since Graham Whitmore approached their row, Marcus almost laughed. A little. Ava smiled, then returned to watching the runway. Marcus looked down at his boarding pass. The paper was slightly bent now, a small crease near the bottom corner where his thumb had held it too tightly. It bothered him more than he expected, not because of the paper, because he knew what it represented. A simple agreement. A company had promised him something. He had paid for that promise, and somehow he was the one being asked to explain why he wanted it honored. A few rows ahead, Graham was speaking quietly with a man Marcus had not noticed before. The man wore an airline operations badge. He was not cabin crew. His name tag read Evan Price, Customer Experience Manager. Marcus watched the conversation without trying to listen. He did not need to. Graham's posture told enough. The confident businessman from earlier had become a customer who believed he had been wronged. Evan approached Jordan. Can I get a quick summary? Jordan stepped aside. Passenger in 3A has a confirmed assignment. Passenger in 5C requested the seat based on loyalty status. We explained the policy. Evan looked toward Graham. Any disruption? Jordan hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Disagreement. Evan lowered his voice. Was there raised language? Refusal to comply? No. Threats? No. Security concerns? No. Evan nodded. Then why am I involved? Jordan looked toward the cabin. Because Mr. Moore requested a manager. Marcus heard that, and he understood the invisible shift. The moment a person with enough confidence asked for someone higher up, the system often rearranged itself around that request. Not because the request was valid, because escalation created pressure. Evan walked toward Marcus. Mr. Ellison? Marcus turned. Yes, I'm Evan Price. I oversee customer experience for this flight group. I understand there has been a concern regarding seating. Marcus nodded. There has. Evan looked at Ava, then back at Marcus. I want to resolve this quickly. Marcus appreciated the wording. Resolve, not punish. Decide, resolve. I do too. Evan glanced at the boarding pass in Marcus's hand. Would you be willing to move if we could find an equivalent seat? Marcus paused. There it was again. Reasonable on the surface, but different now, because it was no longer coming from a flight attendant trying to help two passengers. It was coming from management after another customer had demanded attention. Marcus chose his words carefully. I'm willing to discuss options. I'm not willing to accept that my reservation became negotiable because someone else wanted it. Evan did not respond immediately. Marcus noticed. The manager was not offended. He was thinking. That's a fair distinction, Evan said. Before Marcus could answer, Graham stepped closer. I think we're losing perspective here. Evan turned. Mr. Moore, I have flown with this airline for 15 years. I have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with your company. There it was. Not a threat. A reminder. A reminder of value. Marcus looked down at Ava's backpack. A small handmade patch was sewn onto it. A cartoon airplane she had drawn herself. She had been excited about the trip for weeks. The contrast struck him. A passenger measured value in money spent. Another measured it in a memory he was trying to protect. Then Evan's radio beeped. A message came through. He listened. His expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Jordan, can you confirm the cabin footage from boarding is preserved? Marcus noticed Graham turn. Why would footage need to be preserved? No one answered immediately. That silence was different from the earlier silence. This one carried information. Jordan looked at Evan. We need to preserve everything related to the seating interaction. Graham frowned. For a seat dispute? Evan looked at him. For a customer interaction. A careful answer. A professional answer. But Marcus heard the difference. The airline was no longer deciding who was right. It was protecting the facts before someone's version of events replaced them. Then Evan looked at Marcus. Mr. Ellison, I need to ask you one question. Okay, did anyone tell you that you would be removed from this seat? Marcus thought back. The words, the tone, the implication. No one said the words directly. Evan nodded. But you felt pressured to move. Marcus looked at him. Yes, that was the first time anyone in authority had asked the question that way. Not what was said. It happened. Before Evan could respond, a crew member approached from the rear of the cabin. Sir? Evan turned. The crew member lowered his voice. We have a what kind? The passenger complaint submitted through the app. Evan looked confused. The crew member nodded. He reported that another passenger was refusing to cooperate and creating discomfort in the premium cabin. Marcus felt something inside him settle. Not anger, recognition. The story had already changed. Before anyone had finished investigating, a new version of events had been created, and this time it was written by the person who wanted control of the outcome. Part 4. Counterforce and personal casus Marcus had spent enough years managing construction crews to recognize when a problem stopped being about the original mistake. It happened on job sites all the time. A missing permit, a wrong measurement, a delivery that arrived late. The first 10 minutes were usually about fixing the issue. After that, people started protecting themselves. Someone changed the story. Someone remembered things differently. Someone began asking who would look bad if the truth came out. The cabin was entering that second stage. Evan Price stood near the galley reading the complaint on his tablet. Marcus could not see the words, but he could see the way Evan's eyes moved. Not like someone reading an angry message, like someone comparing two versions of the same event. Finally, Evan looked up. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "can you walk me through what happened from your perspective?" Graham straightened his jacket. Of course. His voice was calm again, almost too calm. I boarded, noticed there was a seating issue, and politely asked whether an accommodation could be made. The passenger became resistant, and the conversation became uncomfortable for the cabin. Marcus listened. The sentence was carefully built. Direct accusation, no obvious lie, just small changes. The seat was no longer his request. It was a seating issue. The pressure was no longer pressure. It was a conversation. And Marcus was no longer a passenger protecting a reservation. He was a person who had supposedly made things difficult. Evan turned toward Marcus. "Mr. Ellison?" Marcus looked at him. "I was seated when he arrived. He told the crew there was a mistake. I showed my boarding pass. The crew confirmed my seat." He paused. "After that, I was asked multiple times if I would move." Evan nodded. "And you declined?" "Yes." "Why?" Marcus looked at Ava. She was drawing something on the small activity card the airline provided. A little airplane, a little house, a family standing between them. "Because I did not think I should have to give up something confirmed to me just because someone more comfortable with asking expected me to." Evan looked down. He wrote something. Then Graham spoke. "I think we should be careful with assumptions." The sentence sounded harmless. Marcus noticed that. The most difficult moments were rarely wrapped in openly cruel words. They usually arrived dressed as caution. "I don't believe I made assumptions," Marcus said. Graham looked at him. "I'm simply saying this has become unnecessarily complicated." Marcus almost answered immediately. He stopped himself. That was one of the hardest lessons he had learned as a father. Not every sentence deserved his first reaction. Sometimes his daughter was watching more than the person speaking. At Ava, then back at Graham. "I agree." Graham seemed surprised. Marcus continued. "It became complicated when a confirmed passenger was treated like an obstacle." The words were quiet. Not a speech, not a performance, just a fact. Evan looked toward Jordan. "Do we have the boarding records?" Jordan checked. "Yes." "Gate scans?" "Yes." "Seat assignment history?" "Yes." "Any upgrade request attached to 3A? A pause. "No." That answer mattered because it changed the shape of the problem. There was no technical mistake, no computer error, no missing upgrade, no confusion. Just a passenger who wanted an exception, and a system that had briefly considered making someone else absorb the cost of that exception. Then Marcus's phone vibrated. A message from his wife. "How's Ava doing?" He looked at his daughter. She was still drawing. He typed back. "Just ready to fly." He almost added more. He almost explained. The seat. The argument. The strange feeling of being questioned while holding proof. But he stopped, because he did not want his wife to spend the flight worrying. That was the part nobody saw. The argument was not just happening in the cabin. It was happening in the quiet spaces afterward. The text message he softened. The story he would tell his daughter later. The question he would ask himself when the plane landed. Had he done enough? Had he done too much? Marcus had always believed in standing his ground, but standing your ground was different when someone else was standing beside you. Ava looked up. "Eddie? Yeah? Are we in trouble?" The question hit harder than anything Graham had said. Marcus turned toward her. "No." "Then why are people talking like that?" Marcus looked at the cabin, at the passengers pretending not to watch, at the crew trying to balance fairness with procedure. at Graham, who seemed more concerned with the inconvenience than the reason it existed. Sometimes, Marcus said carefully, people get uncomfortable when things don't happen the way they expected. Ava considered that. Then she nodded like she was filing the answer away. A few minutes later, Evan returned. His expression was more serious. Mr. Ellison, we have reviewed the initial information. Marcus waited. The airline is going to preserve the records and conduct a formal review after landing. Marcus nodded. Okay, but there is something else. Evan looked toward Graham. Mr. Moore has requested that the cabin crew document that he felt another passenger created an uncomfortable environment. Marcus felt the weight of that sentence. Not because it surprised him, because it was another example of how easily discomfort could become a weapon. Before Marcus could respond, Daniel Ruiz spoke from behind him. Can I provide my statement now? Everyone turned. Daniel held up his phone. I wrote down the timeline while it was happening. Evan looked surprised. You did? Yes. Daniel shrugged. I work in insurance claims. Details disappear quickly when people remember things differently. Marcus looked at him. A stranger had done something simple. He had paid attention. Daniel continued. I don't know either of these men. I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying what I saw. For the first time that morning, Marcus felt something other than pressure. Not victory, not relief, something smaller. A reminder that truth did not always arrive through power. Sometimes it arrived because one person decided that what they witnessed mattered. But the situation was far from over, because before the aircraft doors closed, Evan received another message. The complaint had triggered an automatic escalation, and according to airline policy, a premium cabin dispute involving a reported passenger conflict required a decision before departure. The crew now had two choices: follow the easiest path, or follow the facts. Part 5. The reversal or deeper problem. The easiest decision would have been simple: move Marcus. Not because he was wrong, because he was available. That was how these situations often resolve themselves. The person with less social pressure, fewer complaints, or less visible influence became the person asked to absorb the inconvenience. Evan Price had seen it before. He had worked customer operations long enough to know that a quiet passenger could become the solution to a problem they never created. But this time something bothered him. The timeline, the records, the fact that every piece of information pointed in the same direction. Sure. He stepped toward the front of the cabin. Jordan, can you pull the seat assignment history one more time? She nodded. A few seconds later, the information appeared. Evan studied the screen. Original booking. A confirmed payment, no upgrade request, no equipment change, no operational reassignment, nothing. Just a passenger in 3A and another passenger who wanted 3A. He looked at Graham. Mr. Whitmore, I want to make sure I understand. Did anyone from the airline tell you this seat had been reserved for you? Graham hesitated. It was brief, but everyone noticed. No. Did anyone offer you a confirmed upgrade into 3A? No. Did your assistant receive written confirmation? Graham's expression changed. My assistant handles many arrangements. That wasn't my question. The sentence was not aggressive. It was simply direct. Marcus noticed the difference. For the first time, Graham was not speaking to someone who was trying to keep him happy. He was speaking to someone trying to establish facts. I was told there would be flexibility, Graham said. Evan nodded. Flexibility is not ownership. Graham looked away. Marcus watched quietly. Part of him wanted to feel satisfaction. He wanted the moment where everyone understood what had happened. But another part of him felt something more complicated, because this was not just a stranger who had wanted his seat. It was a man who had built a version of reality where wanting something and deserving something had become almost the same thing. Then Jordan spoke. Evan, there's something else. She held up her device. The complaint was filed before we completed the first review. Evan looked at her. Before? Yes. How long after the interaction? Jordan checked. 3 minutes. Marcus looked toward Graham. 3 minutes. That meant the complaint was not written after reflection. It was written while the situation was still unfolding. Evan read the report. Then he looked at Marcus. Mr. Ellison, I want to ask you something. Marcus nodded. Okay. Did Mr. Moore mention your daughter at any point? Marcus thought. No. Did he ask if she was comfortable? No. Evan looked down. That detail was not part of a policy, not part of a procedure, but it mattered. Because the complaint described a disruption, not a father traveling with a child, not a passenger protecting a paid reservation, a disruption. The language itself had removed the person. And Daniel Ruiz leaned forward. "Can I ask something?" Evan turned. "Yes? Are you aware there were other passengers who heard the conversation?" "Yes, because I think that matters." Daniel held up his phone. "I wrote down the exact order." Evan accepted the note. He read silently. 2 p.m. Passenger in 5C approaches 3A. 3:03 p.m. Passenger in 3A shows boarding pass. 3:04 p.m. Crew confirms assigned seat. 3:05 p.m. Passenger in 5C requests manager. The note was not dramatic. It was why it was powerful. It did not contain opinions, only sequence. Marcus looked at Daniel. "Thank you." Daniel nodded. "No, I just don't like when people argue about what happened when we can still know what happened." That sentence stayed with Marcus, because that was exactly the difference. The argument was no longer about feelings. It was about whether facts mattered before someone important became uncomfortable. Evan stepped toward the aisle. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience." He did not announce details. He did not embarrass anyone. He simply spoke with the authority of someone who had finally decided what his responsibility was. "The assigned seating will remain unchanged." Marcus looked at Ava. She smiled slightly. Evan continued. "However, due to the reported passenger conflict and the operational review requirement, we need to complete additional steps before departure." A few passengers sighed. Marcus felt it immediately. The cost. Not to Graham. To everyone, a delayed flight, a disrupted cabin, people missing connections, people who had nothing to do with the argument. And that was the part Marcus did not want forgotten. Justice was not supposed to create new victims. Evan returned to the front. "Mr. Ellison, thank you for your patience." Marcus nodded. "Thank you for checking." Evan paused. Then he said something quieter. "I should have asked for the timeline first." Marcus looked at him. It was not a full apology, not yet, but it was an admission. A small crack in the system. Then Evan's tablet received another notification. His face changed. This time, not because of the seat dispute. Because the review had found something unexpected. The complaint Graham submitted was not the first complaint connected to that cabin. It was the fourth, and the previous three involved different passengers, different routes, different crews, but the same unusual pattern. Part 6, the second problem in motion. The fourth complaint changed the atmosphere more than the argument ever had. Marcus noticed it immediately. People reacted differently when a problem became a pattern. A single complaint could be dismissed as a misunderstanding. A second one could be unfortunate. A third one could be coincidence. But fourth meant someone had to stop asking what happened once and start asking what kept happening. Evan Price moved toward the galley with Jordan beside him. "What pattern?" Jordan asked quietly. Evan looked at the tablet. "I'm still verifying." That answer told Marcus something. The manager was being careful. Not because he doubted what he was seeing, because he understood the weight of saying it aloud. In his years restoring old buildings, Marcus had learned that hidden damage was rarely where people expected it to be. A wall could look perfect from the outside while the structure behind it slowly failed. The problem was not always the crack. Sometimes the problem was the reason the crack kept returning. Ava tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, yeah? Are we still going?" Marcus glanced toward the front of the cabin. "I hope so." She looked at the airplane drawing in her lap. "I made us a window." Marcus smiled. "Clouds? For when we get there." He looked at the drawing. A child's version of a window. Simple, open, no arguments attached. Then his phone vibrated again. Another message from his wife. "Everything okay?" Marcus stared at the screen. He could tell her the truth. That a stranger had tried to take his seat, that the airline was reviewing it, that he was sitting in a premium cabin surrounded by people pretending not to listen. Instead, he typed, "Small delay. Ava is okay." Put the phone away. Not because he was hiding, because sometimes protecting someone meant deciding which details they did not need to carry yet. A few minutes later, Evan returned. "Mr. Ellison, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" Marcus looked at Ava. "She stays with me." Of course. They stepped only a few feet away. The cabin was still close enough that Marcus could see his daughter. "I want to explain where we are," Evan said. Marcus nodded. "Okay. We reviewed 3 previous incidents involving Mr. Whitmore's travel history with our airline. Complaints? Yes. What happened?" Evan looked uncomfortable. "Each one was handled separately." Marcus waited. That answer contained more information than it seemed. Separately. A word organizations often used when they did not want to connect things. What were the similarities? Evan glanced down. In each case, another passenger was described as creating discomfort after a disagreement involving seating, access, or cabin preference. Marcus frowned slightly. Were they the same kind of passengers? Evan did not answer immediately. That was an answer. Marcus lowered his voice. What are you saying? I'm saying I need more information before making conclusions. Marcus respected that. He did. Because conclusions without proof were exactly what had created the problem in the first place. What do the previous records show? Evan tapped the screen. One involved a seat change request. One involved a lounge access disagreement. One involved a priority boarding issue. And the other passengers? Different people. Marcus looked at him. Different people who were all asked to explain themselves. Evan did not respond. Because that was the question that mattered. Not whether Graham Whitmore had broken a rule, whether the system kept making the same person carry the burden of proving they belonged. Then Jordan approached. Evan, we found something else. She handed him a report. The previous complaints were categorized as isolated customer conflicts. Evan read it. Viewed them. Jordan hesitated. Different supervisors. Marcus noticed the hesitation. What? Jordan looked at him. The same type of resolution was recommended each time. What resolutions? Move the other passenger if possible. Nobody spoke for a moment, because now the pattern had a shape. Not a single employee, not a single mistake, a response, a habit, a system that had learned which problem was easier to remove. Evan closed the report. I need to contact operations. Marcus nodded. Because of Mr. Whitmore. Evan looked at him. Because of the process. That answer mattered. The problem was no longer one man demanding a seat. It was an organization discovering that convenience had quietly replaced fairness. But there was another complication. The captain had received the updated information, and because the cabin conflict had now become a formal operational review, the airline had to decide whether everyone would continue the flight under normal conditions, or whether the entire premium cabin would be removed and reassigned before departure. Marcus looked around. Passengers were getting impatient. A businessman checked his watch. A woman near the aisle sighed. A family with 2 children whispered about their connection time. The consequences were spreading. And Marcus hated that. Because he had spent the entire morning fighting not to be treated as the problem. Now dozens of people were affected by a problem he did not create. Evan returned to the front. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We are completing a required review before departure. He stopped there. No names. No accusations. Public humiliation. Marcus appreciated that. Then Evan looked at him. Mr. Ellison, there is one more thing. Marcus waited. The View team is asking whether you are willing to provide a formal statement after landing. Marcus looked at Ava, then at the boarding pass still resting in his hand. A piece of paper that had started this entire situation. I will. Evan nodded. Thank you. Marcus sat back down. For the first time that morning, he realized something. He had thought the battle was about keeping his seat. It was not. The seat was only where the system had revealed itself, and now the question was no longer whether Marcus belonged in 3A. The question was how many people had been quietly moved out of their own place before anyone decided to look closer. Part 7, the collision and accountability test. The aircraft never left the gate. That was the part many passengers would remember later. Not the argument, not the complaint, not even the delay. They would remember that the plane stayed connected to the terminal while a decision was made. Because once the doors were closed and the engine started, every choice became harder to reverse. Evan Price stood near the front of the cabin with his tablet in one hand and a folder in the other. A real folder. Marcus noticed that. Most of the airline's information lived behind screens and passwords, but when something became serious enough, people still reached for paper, a physical record, something that could be signed, something that could not disappear with a refresh. Ladies and gentlemen, Evan announced, we appreciate your continued patience. The airline has decided to complete a formal review before departure. A few passengers groaned. Someone near the back said, how long is this going to take? Evan did not pretend to know. That depends on completing the review correctly. Marcus respected that answer, not because it fixed the delay. Because it admitted that speed and accuracy were not always the same thing. A few minutes later, 2 additional employees boarded. They were not security. They were not there to remove anyone. Their badges identified them as part of the airline's customer compliance team. Marcus watched their approach. They did not walk toward him. They walked toward the facts. That mattered. The first employee introduced herself. Ina Brooks. I'm part of the Customer Resolution Review team. She looked around the cabin. We will be speaking with the involved passengers and crew members. We are not here to determine blame based on a complaint alone. We are here to establish the sequence of events. Sequence. Ace almost smiled. That was the word Daniel had written down. The sequence, the order mattered. Lena spoke with Jordan first. The supervisor described the interaction. No exaggeration, no dramatic language, just what happened. Then she spoke with Daniel. He handed over his notes. Lena read them carefully. You wrote this during the interaction? Yes. Why? Daniel shrugged. Because people remember things differently when they feel embarrassed. Marcus looked at him. That answer was simple, but it explained why the note mattered. Memory changed under pressure. A record created in the moment carried a different weight. Then Lena approached Graham. Mr. Moore, I'd like to hear your account. Graham smiled. I've already explained. I understand. I'm asking again because this is a formal review. He leaned back. Fine. His tone remained controlled. I requested assistance. I was treated as though I was demanding something unreasonable. The other passenger became defensive, and the situation escalated. Lena looked at her notes. Did Mr. Ellison raise his voice? No. Did he refuse a crew instruction? No. Did he threaten anyone? No. Did he use inappropriate language? Graham paused. No. Lena nodded. Then what specific action caused the situation to escalate? Graham looked toward Marcus. The attitude. The answer surprised even Graham, because it revealed the weakness in the complaint. The problem was no longer an action. It was an interpretation. Lena did not challenge him. She simply wrote something down. Then she turned to Marcus. Mr. Ellison. Marcus stood. Eva looked up. I'll be right back. She nodded. He stepped into the aisle. Lena asked the same questions. Did you refuse to cooperate? No. Did you insult Mr. Moore? No. Did you threaten him? No. Did you make any attempt to resolve the situation? Marcus thought about it. Yes. What did you do? I showed my boarding pass. I listened to the crew. I answered questions. Lena nodded. Why did you refuse to move? Marcus looked at the seat behind him. The seat that had become the center of everything. Because I did not believe my confirmed reservation should become less important because another passenger wanted an exception. Lena wrote that down. Then she asked the question nobody had asked yet. Mr. Ellison, did you feel that you were being treated differently because of who you are? The cabin became very still. Not silent, still. Marcus took a moment, because he knew the answer mattered, and he also knew accusations without clarity could be dismissed. I felt that the assumption was made before anyone checked the facts. Lena waited. Marcus continued. I don't know what was in Mr. Whitmore's mind. I know what happened. A man approached my seat, expected me to move, and the system immediately started looking for ways to solve his discomfort. Lena looked down. That was the distinction. Intent was difficult. Impact could be examined. After the interviews, the review team gathered near the galley. Marcus could not hear everything, but he saw enough, a document, a timeline, a discussion. Then Evan approached the captain. The captain listened. A few moments later, he made a decision. The flight would not continue with the current cabin arrangement. Not because Marcus had done anything wrong. Not because Graham had been declared guilty. Because the airline had identified a process failure that required correction before departure. Jordan returned to the cabin. Her voice was calm. Passengers, we apologize for the continued delay. Due to the nature of this review, we will need to make a temporary adjustment to the premium cabin seating before departure. A passenger near the aisle frowned. Are we all being punished because two people argued? Marcus felt that question, because it was fair. Everyone was paying the price for a conflict they did not create. Then Evan answered. No, this is not a punishment. It is a procedural decision to ensure flight continues fairly and safely. Marcus looked at him. Fairly, that word mattered. But then Evan added something unexpected. Mr. Whitmore will be escorted off the aircraft while the airline completes the review. The cabin reacted, not loudly, but visibly. Em stared. Excuse me? Evan remained steady. This is not a final disciplinary decision. It is a temporary removal pending review because the complaint history and current incident require further investigation. The difference mattered. Suspension, not conviction. Review, not revenge. Graham looked around. For the first time since boarding, he seemed to understand something. Yeah. The system he expected to work for him had finally started working the same way for everyone. As he gathered his belongings, he stopped near Marcus. For a moment, Marcus thought he might apologize. He did not. Instead, Graham said quietly, "You made this much bigger than it needed to be." Marcus looked at him. No. He glanced toward the crew, the passengers, and the records being collected. It was already bigger than a seat. Graham walked away. The aircraft door opened. And 10 minutes after Marcus had first been challenged over 3A, the entire premium cabin was being reorganized because the airline had finally decided to examine the pattern behind the complaint. But when Marcus sat back down, he did not feel like he had won. Not yet, because the review had uncovered the first layer, and the deeper question remained. How many times had the easiest person to move been the person who was expected to move? Part 8, the decision and its cost. The flight finally departed 47 minutes later. To most passengers, the delay became a story they would tell briefly, a strange argument, a difficult traveler, a flight that left late, then life would move on. But Marcus knew better. Some moments ended when people stopped talking about them. Others followed you home. He sat beside Ava as the aircraft climbed above the clouds she had been waiting to see. She pressed her face against the window. "Daddy." "Yeah, we're above them." Marcus looked outside. The clouds stretched beneath the aircraft like a white field. A few hours earlier, he had been fighting to keep a seat. Now he was watching his daughter experience something she had imagined for weeks. That was the strange thing about difficult moments. Even when you survived them, they did not erase the reason you were there. But Marcus also knew the situation was not finished. A seat dispute had become a formal review. A complaint had become a pattern. And a pattern meant people would have to decide what responsibility looked like. 3 days after the flight, Marcus received an email from the airline. Not a generic apology, not a customer service survey, a request. They wanted him to participate in a follow-up review. Marcus read the message twice. Then he closed his laptop. His wife, Danielle, looked over from the kitchen table. "What is it?" "The airline wants another statement." She studied his face. "You don't sound happy." Marcus leaned back. "I'm not sure what I am," that was the truth. He had expected anger. He had expected satisfaction. Instead, he felt tired, because being right did not mean the experience disappeared. It only meant you were finally allowed to explain it. 2 weeks later, Marcus joined a video meeting with the airline's review team. Evan Price was there. Jordan was there. A compliance director named Renee Wallace led the meeting. She began with something Marcus did not expect. "We owe you an explanation." Marcus listened. Renee shared the findings. The airline had reviewed the boarding records, crew statements, complaint history, and previous incident reports. The conclusion was not that every previous complaint had involved the same exact circumstances. It had not. But the response pattern was consistent. Employees had often attempted to reduce conflict by moving the passenger with less perceived influence, rather than verifying whether the request was legitimate. Marcus nodded slowly. "So the problem wasn't just one person." Renee answered carefully. "The problem was a decision-making pattern. That mattered, because it meant the airline was not using one person as a convenient villain. It was examining a process." Then came the part Marcus expected least. "We also found areas where our own employees made mistakes." Jordan looked down. Marcus remembered her, the first attendant, the supervisor trying to balance everyone, the people caught between policy and pressure. Renee continued. "Following the review, the airline is making several changes." She explained them. Premium cabin conflict reports would now require documented timelines before any seating adjustment. Crew members would receive additional training on distinguishing discomfort from actual disruption. Repeat complaint patterns involving different passengers would trigger a broader review instead of being closed separately. And most importantly, confirmed reservations would not be treated as negotiable simply because another customer had higher status. He listened. Those changes mattered, but they did not erase everything. "What happened to Mr. Whitmore?" he asked. Renee paused. "The airline completed a separate review of his conduct, and he has been suspended from the loyalty program pending further evaluation." Marcus waited. "Suspended?" "Yes, not permanently removed. The review found behavior inconsistent with the expectations of the program again. Distinction. A consequence, not revenge." Marcus appreciated that. because fairness meant something different from getting even. Then Renee said something else. Mr. Ellison, there is another matter. Marcus looked at the screen. We would like to compensate you for the disruption. He expected that. A refund. A travel credit. Something practical. But the next sentence surprised him. We would also like your permission to use this incident as part of a training case study. Marcus leaned back. That was harder. Because a story could become useful, but it could also become something people consumed without understanding. I don't want to be an example, Marcus said. Renee nodded. I understand. I want people to understand why the process failed. That is exactly why we asked. Marcus looked toward the living room. Eva's drawing was still on the refrigerator. The airplane, the house, the family, the window. He thought about what she had asked him. Are we in trouble? He had spent years teaching her that doing the right thing mattered. Now he had to decide whether sharing this moment helped anyone beyond himself. I'll agree, Marcus said, but with one condition. Renee waited. Don't make it about me keeping a seat. The room stayed quiet. Make it about how easy it becomes to move the wrong person when nobody checks why. Renee nodded. We can do that. After the meeting ended, Marcus walked outside. His neighborhood was quiet. A normal afternoon, a delivery truck passing, a neighbor watering plants, a child riding a bicycle down the sidewalk. The world had not changed. A dramatic announcement. No perfect ending. Just a small correction moving through a large system. But there was still a cost. Marcus had missed a day of work dealing with calls and paperwork. He had spent nights wondering whether he should have spoken differently, whether staying calm was enough, whether people listened because he was right or because the evidence finally made it impossible not to. A victory could still leave a bruise. And as Marcus looked at the airplane drawing on his refrigerator later that evening, he realized something. The seat had been returned. The policy had changed. The record had been corrected. But the real question was what happened the next time someone without a witness, without notes, and without a manager willing to look deeper faced the same situation. Because systems did not change when one person was proven right. They changed when people decided the next person deserved the same chance. The first change Marcus noticed was not announced. There was no press release attached to it. No executive statement. No photograph of smiling employees standing beside a new policy. It appeared in the reservation system. 3 weeks after the flight, Marcus opened the airline app to confirm details for a work trip to Baltimore. Beneath the seat selection screen was a new line of text. Confirmed seat assignments may not be displaced to resolve another passenger's preference request. Any exception requires documented operational cause. Marcus read it twice. Then he took a screenshot. Danielle looked over his shoulder from the kitchen counter. That's because of what happened. Partly. You sound disappointed. Marcus set the phone down. I'm not. He thought about it. Maybe I'm just surprised they actually changed something people can use. Danielle gave him a look. That is an extremely depressing definition of surprise. He laughed. It was the first time the subject had made either of them laugh without forcing it. The airline's larger changes took longer. Renee Wallace sent Marcus a written summary after the 30-day review. Cabin supervisors had been instructed to document the original entitlement before asking a passenger to relocate. Complaint histories could now be flagged for pattern review when the same traveler repeatedly described unrelated passengers as disruptive. Crew training had also been revised so that words such as uncomfortable, aggressive, and uncooperative required specific behavior to support them. But the report contained something Marcus had not expected. Jordan had submitted an additional statement. She admitted that during the original incident, she had considered moving Marcus and Ava even after confirming his seat. Not because she believed Graham Whitmore was entitled to 3A, because she believed Marcus would be easier to persuade. Marcus sat with that sentence for a long time. A week later, Jordan called him with Renee's permission. I wanted to tell you myself, she said. Marcus stood in the workshop behind his house, scraping old paint from a window sash. You already put it in the report. I know. The scraper made a dry clicking sound against the wood. Jordan continued. I kept thinking I was de-escalating. That's how I justified it. Marcus stopped working. And now I think I was deciding who could afford to be inconvenienced. He appreciated that she did not decorate the apology. No speech about good intentions. No request for forgiveness. What changed your mind? He asked. The timeline. Marcus almost smiled. Daniel's timeline. Jordan explained that seeing the incident reduced to minutes had made the imbalance obvious. Marcus had produced his boarding pass almost immediately. Graham had produced nothing. Yet the requests for compromise had continued to move toward Marcus. "I should have stopped it sooner," Jordan said. "Yes," Marcus replied. She was quiet. Marcus could have softened it. He did not. Then he added, "What matters now is whether you stop the next one sooner." "I will." That was enough. Not reconciliation, responsibility. Daniel Ruiz also paid a price for speaking up. His employer had contacted him after a short internal airline report identified him as an independent witness. Nothing disciplinary happened, but his supervisor asked why he had involved himself in a dispute that was none of his business. Daniel later told Marcus about it over coffee during a layover. "I told him I was sitting 12 feet away," Daniel said. "At some point, distance stops being an excuse." Marcus stirred his coffee. "You regret it?" Daniel considered the question. "No." Then he smiled. "I regret missing my connection." Marcus laughed. "That I can understand." The airline reimbursed Daniel's rebooking costs and issued compensation to the premium cabin passengers affected by the delay. More importantly, the review did not describe them as collateral damage. The final summary acknowledged that poor conflict handling had imposed costs on passengers who had nothing to do with the original dispute. Graham Whitmore's loyalty program suspension remained in place for 6 months. He was not banned from flying. He was not publicly humiliated. But the airline removed the discretionary concierge privileges that had helped create the expectation that employee flexibility could be summoned on demand. Marcus thought the consequence fit. A month later, he and Ava flew again. Same airline. Different aircraft. When they reached their row, Ava climbed into the window seat and placed her backpack beneath her feet. Then she looked at Marcus. "This one is ours, right?" Marcus checked both boarding passes. "Yep." She nodded as if completing an inspection. Outside, a baggage cart rolled beneath the wing. Ava pressed her palm against the window. Marcus watched her reflection in the glass and realized she had remembered more than he hoped. But she had also remembered something else. This time, when the cabin door closed, nobody asked them to prove twice that they belonged where the ticket already said they did. 6 months after the flight, Marcus received the final review packet from the airline. It was 32 pages. He did not read it all at once. He opened it in the workshop behind his house, where an old double-hung window rested across 2 padded sawhorses. One sash had been stripped to bare wood. The other still carried layers of white paint from 3 different renovations. Marcus read 5 pages. Then he went back to work. That rhythm suited him better. He'd scrape, think, continue. The final findings confirmed what the earlier review had suggested. Graham Whitmore's complaint history showed no proof that every previous dispute had involved discrimination. The airline refused to claim more than the records supported. But it did find that employees had repeatedly handled his complaints by asking other passengers to absorb the inconvenience first. That was the failure, not a secret policy, not a conspiracy. A habit reinforced by speed, customer status, and the desire to make conflict disappear. The airline's executive committee approved permanent changes across its domestic premium cabins. Seat reassignment requests now required a recorded reason code. Crew could still move passengers for safety, accessibility, aircraft balance, equipment changes, family reunification needs, or other legitimate operational reasons. But a customer preference alone could not be disguised as necessity. More importantly, complaint reports using terms such as aggressive, threatening, or uncooperative now required a description of specific observable conduct. Renee Wallace explained the purpose during their final call. "We found that vague language was doing too much work." Marcus understood exactly what she meant. A word could become a shortcut. A shortcut could become a record, and a record could follow someone long after everyone forgot who had written it. The airline also reviewed the 3 older incidents connected to Graham. 2 passengers agreed to be contacted. One had been moved from a lounge seating area after declining to give up a reserved conference booth. Another had accepted a different premium seat after being told it would help departure stay on time. The airline compensated both. It did not pretend money repaired the experience. It corrected the records and acknowledged that neither passenger had violated policy. Graham's 6-month suspension ended, but his invitation-only concierge privileges were not restored. He remained a customer. just no longer a customer whose preferences arrived with invisible extra weight. Marcus thought that consequence was appropriate. No destruction, no public spectacle, just a boundary. Evan Price stayed with the airline and was moved into a regional customer operations training role. Jordan remained a senior cabin supervisor after completing the revised training program and later helped teach a module built from anonymized cases. Marcus had insisted on that word. Cases. Plural. He refused to let the airline turn his experience into a heroic story about one black father who stood his ground while everyone else learned a lesson. The problem had existed before him. The repair needed to exist after him. As for Marcus, he received the refund the airline had promised, reimbursement for the workday he lost during the review process, and enough travel credit to cover the trip he had originally taken with Ava. He used only part of it. It expired untouched. Danielle called that ridiculous. You fought for the company to fix the system and then refused free flights? I didn't refuse them. You let $1,200 expire. Marcus tightened a clamp on the restored window sash. That is a very aggressive interpretation of my budgeting, she laughed. So is calling it budgeting. The workshop smelled of linseed oil and old pine. Marcus smiled while Danielle leaned against the workbench. The case had taken months from him. Even after the outcome, he disliked crowded boarding lanes more than before. He checked seat assignments twice, sometimes 3 times. Justice had corrected the record. It had not edited his nervous system. That evening, Ava came into the workshop carrying the drawing she had made on the original flight. The airplane, the house, Emily, the square window. Can this go in my room now? She asked. Marcus looked at it. For months, it had stayed on the refrigerator. Sure. He found a simple wooden frame beneath the workbench. They placed the drawing inside together. Ava held it up. The window is crooked. Marcus tilted his head. A little. Can we fix it? He looked at her. No, she frowned. Why? Because you drew it that way. She considered this, then smiled. Okay. They hung it beside her bedroom door. The next morning, Marcus received an email from Renee. The subject line contained no urgency. Request for community review. He opened it while drinking coffee. The airline had begun testing the new complaint language standards in several airports. During that pilot, another issue had surfaced. Not seating. Not premium cabins. Passengers using mobility assistance were being marked as non-compliant when boarding delays caused by equipment shortages were incorrectly attributed to them. Renee was assembling a small outside review group. She wanted Marcus to participate. Marcus read the invitation once, then again. Danielle walked past and noticed his expression. What now? Marcus turned the laptop toward her. She read the first paragraph. That's not your fight. No. And. Marcus looked toward Ava's drawing in the hallway. The crooked window was visible from the kitchen. He closed the laptop. Not today. He had a school pickup in 40 minutes and a window installation after that. The invitation could wait until evening. For once, choosing when to step forward mattered as much as choosing whether. Marcus picked up his truck keys. As he passed Ava's drawing, the morning light caught the glass and briefly covered the crooked window with his reflection. Then he walked outside.